Here in California, the Affordable Care Act is administered through Covered California. Joining me with how the state's coverage will move forward after today's decision are my guest, Gary Roto, Director of Health Policy for the Council of Community Clinics, and California Western School of Law professor Glenn Smith. And Gary, what does today's Supreme Court decision mean for the healthcare system in general here in California?
Well, while it didn't have a specific effect or a direct effect on California, what it did is it kind of settled the air. It allowed people who often get confused by the national news to realize that Covered California, our state exchange, and the Medi-Cal expansion will continue.
But you're definitely invested with this, with the clinics. What was your first thought when you heard that the subsidies had been upheld?
Well, I was delighted for our colleagues all across the country because 2/3 of all clinics, all community health centers and community clinics are in states where there is a federal exchange. And if the subsidies had been ruled illegal, that would have really affected those particular sites of care.
And Glenn, what did you think about? Were you surprised by this 6-3 outcome?
I was. I think that we were thinking we'd be lucky to see the act upheld by one or the other of Justice Kennedy or the Chief Justice. So to have both of them agree on an opinion written by the Chief Justice was, I think, surprising.
Well, in his speech today, President Obama, as I'm sure you heard, said that the Affordable Care Act is here to stay. ACA is here to stay. Now, supporters in D.C. were doing the same thing. They were fist pumping into the air. You know, ACA is here to stay, while opponents of Obamacare stood in protest. Now, Glenn, let me ask you this. Do you think today's Supreme Court ruling will put to rest this, or do you think that, you know, we're likely to hear about this into the presidential election?
Oh, I have no illusions we won't hear about it in the presidential election. I'm hoping that it will be clear that twice the Supreme Court was invited, first on constitutional grounds and then on statutory grounds, to throw a roadblock, and it declined, and it said it wants to defer to the political process. So I hope that message at least gets clear in the legal system, which is what they can send a signal for.
So do you think it'll go back to the Supreme Court on some level, or do they generally not revisit it after so many
This
times?
issue won't go back. I never say never. There's a couple of lower court obscure arguments running around there. But, you know, anyone who is a perceptive reader of this opinion and the one 3 years ago ought to be clear that, at least from the standpoint of the courts, it's over.
It's settled. Gary, getting back to Covered California, what kind of challenges does California still face when it comes to the Covered California, the Affordable Care Act?
Well, after 2 open enrollment periods, arguably those that continue to be uninsured and are eligible are the hardest to reach. So there's additional outreach that needs to be done almost on an individual to individual basis, certainly community to community basis. We'll continue to partner with Covered California to reach out to folks that are eligible for whether it's the exchange or whether it's the Medi-Cal expansion, as well as to those folks that may not be eligible for either, because, as you know, Peggy, community clinics serve anybody in the community, no matter their ability to pay.
And when is open enrollment again? It's coming up again in this fall.
It'll be in the fall.
All right. Glenn, on a different note, let's talk about the Supreme Court here. They have a few other rulings coming up. Are there any that have implications here in California?
The one with the most direct implication is a case involving Arizona and whether a citizen commission to draw federal legislative districts is constitutional if it comes from voter initiative rather than from the legislature. And Arizona's law is very similar to California's. If the court were to invalidate the Arizona law, it would put a major cloud over California's law. And as we saw recently when the Citizens Commission drew the districts, they ended up being more competitive and more districts that either party could win than before. So that has a political significance for us.
But we only have a couple days left, right?
Right, we do.
Have till Monday?
We have till Monday, unless they extend it. I think it'll be Monday. But, you know, we have some other big important decisions like same-sex marriage and lethal injection and others that will have an indirect effect on the national policy on those things.
In the meantime, we move forward with Covered California and ACA. Glenn Smith and Gary Roto, thank you so much.
Thank you, Peggy.
Oh, you're welcome.